Well, thanks for coming this afternoon. I know the session after lunch, people can always be, you've got some good tacos or whatever else you had in your belly, and it can be a little bit slow. So we're going to try and keep this session a little bit more interactive. I am going to come at you with a little bit of information about brain chemistry and things like that early on, but we are going to do some work today in this session. So you're not going to listen to me talk all afternoon. Nobody wants that, so we're going to do a little bit of work ourselves. If you're not interested in doing that, I suggest that you back slowly out the door quietly sometime over the next 20-25 minutes or so, so that you're able to do that. But today we're going to talk about reframing as a tool that we can use for de-escalation. In order to do that, we need to talk about de-escalation just generally, and I want to start with a couple caveats. When we talk about de-escalation, we talk about it in some different types of frameworks. When we think about de-escalation, I think about things like a toddler who's upset because you brought them the orange cup and they want the blue cup. Anyone have that conversation with a toddler before? But we also think about things like maybe someone holding up a bank who is really escalated because they're desperate and they need money and they don't see any other options, and it's like a life or death situation. We're not going to be on either end of that extreme today. We're going to be somewhere in the middle. So if you came to negotiate with toddlers, we might be able to go in that direction a little bit. We can extrapolate a little bit that way. If you came to learn how to negotiate with terrorists, that's also a different workshop, probably. My training, just so that everybody does know, does actually connect to some of that, though. My name is Crystal Armstrong. I work for the Department of Labor and Industry. I'm the administrator of workforce services. But my background is in conflict management, and in particular in international conflict management. So what does that mean? That means that I have studied how people recruit into the Islamic State. I've worked with tribes in different areas in the African continent who do some really interesting things in the way that they interact with women and the way that women are treated as tools. I worked with Niels Barnard, who, for those of you who are not familiar, is the gentleman who negotiated with Nelson Mandela for moving away from the apartheid government. If you ever want to learn how to negotiate, I definitely recommend talking to the bad guys. It's a good way to learn. I don't do much of that now, though. I do a lot of work at the Workforce Services Division, where we do work with a lot of folks who have some interesting experiences. They may be working with unemployment. Are there folks from unemployment in the room today? Have you ever dealt with an escalated claimant? No. Never? Have they ever shared a bad word or two with you?
I've learned some.
You've learned some new words. Anybody ever made a threat?
Yes.
Okay. So we do still deal with the same types of things. Everywhere we go, there's conflict. Anybody have a spouse or significant other? Ever had a fight? So these things happen all over the place. It doesn't matter if it's a world leader who's negotiating for land, for property, for people, or if it's, again, that toddler who's mad about the blue cup. Conflict is the same. The way that we approach it can very much be the same. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to teach you some different tactics, and one tactic in particular that you can use and apply across a lot of different settings. I'm going to jump back to our agenda just so that you know what we're going to go through today and you know what to expect. We're going to talk in general about why conflict escalates at work. This, I would say, is not what anyone would consider rocket science. You all are in the workplace. You know what causes escalation at the office, but we're going to talk through some of that because that's the antecedent to where we're going. The biochemistry of stress and threat response This is just knowing what's going on in our brain so that we know how to handle that, and so that we know what's going on in other people's brains so that they know how to handle it. Why people lose flexibility under pressure. So if we know what's happening in somebody's brain, we know how to treat them. And then we're going to talk about de-escalation before problem solving. Has anybody ever made the terrible mistake of saying to a woman, "Why don't you just calm down?" How'd that work out? Sometimes when we think about problem solving, folks who really are solution-oriented may jump the gun. And so we're going to talk about ways that we can make sure that someone is in a state of de-escalation before we try to tackle the problem. Because if you try to solve the problem before the other party is ready, it's not going to get anywhere. We're going to do some modeling and some examples. So if you think you might want to volunteer, I'm looking at you. We had a conversation earlier. Think about that, because I'm going to do a couple examples up here. And then we're going to do some practice. This is the work that I was talking about that we can do together. We're going to practice with each other in some pairs, where you're going to get to take turns being the escalated individual, which is fun, and the person doing the de-escalation, which is not fun, but that's how we grow. Then we're going to do some group simulations, which is really fun. And then we'll debrief kind of along the way, and then again right at the end. Does that sound like a good plan? Is there anything up here that that you weren't expecting, or anything else that you were expecting to hear today that isn't represented up here, so that I can make sure that we all cover what everybody wants to do? All right, let's get started then. So let's start with just a quick activity here. I want everybody to think about the last time that you felt irritated, or maybe pushed into a corner, or where somebody publicly challenged you. Maybe it was in a meeting, somebody questioned an idea that you presented, or you were feeling like you were called out. I think you think about what happened to your body in that moment. Some people get sweaty palms. Some people feel their face go red all the way up. Some people will clench their jaws. Some people's foot starts moving under the table. What does that look like for you? Turn to somebody next to you or right behind you and just discuss that a little bit for a minute. What does that look like for you? What does that experience feel like? Go ahead. All right, so what do we think? Give me a couple answers. You can just shout them out.
Rapid heart rate.
A rapid heart rate. You can feel your heart kind of pulsing in your chest. Absolutely. What else?
Tight your jaw.
Tighten your jaw. Anybody clench? Yep.
I get shaky.
Shaky? Shaky in your hands or your voice or both?
Like my body feels like it's around my brain.
Yep. What else?
blood pressure rise.
Blood pressure, yep.
Bill, some people get fidgety.
Fidgety, antsy, yep.
Facial expressions.
Who has RBF? I'm not going to spell that out. As the Department of Labor, we try to usually spell out acronyms, but you guys know where I'm going with that. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So these things are different for everybody. It's good to recognize them in yourself when they're happening because, you know, a lot of times no one gives us permission to sort of take time and collect ourselves. So when you can recognize it in yourself, you can take the time to give yourself that permission. I'm still learning how to do that. I think everybody needs practice. What I would encourage you all to do is tonight, don't pick a fight, but when the next time a fight comes up over something inconsequential, but that just, you know, grinds your gears a little bit. Maybe you're trying to decide on what restaurant you're going to go to. My husband and I have that conversation on a regular basis. Where do you want to go? I don't know. Where do you want to go? I don't know. See if you can recognize what happens to your body in that conversation, and then maybe ask them. Say, hey, you know, I did this reframing thing, and we talked about what happens. Whenever we talk about this, I notice this happening in me. What happens in you? Just try that and see if your reaction is similar to theirs. It's just interesting to see, and you know, it gives them an opportunity to reflect in the same way. You don't have to go home and teach them a workshop, but you know, it's kind of fun to do. I don't know if everybody thinks conflict is as fun as I do, but if you're curious, you can give it a try. Does anybody have any kind of an activation that they feel is like odd or tough? I've had a couple, yeah, please go ahead. Angry crying. This is actually one that has come up before, and this is one of the reasons that I ask. So when we get in scenarios where we do have conflict like this, sometimes the ways that people respond to stress like this are not the way that we necessarily feel. And that's not that they're abnormal, but they're just not something that we've seen before. So when you're in a situation where someone else does appear escalated, it may not look like what you feel or what you recognize as escalated. So someone is angry crying, give them some grace. Try to recognize that as one of the things that might possibly show up as a cue. Thank you for sharing that, yeah. Any others? I had one gentleman who told me that he has to go to the bathroom. And so he was getting critique that he was a conflict avoider. And it was because his body reacts by telling him he needs to go number 2. So these do show up differently, and I don't say this to, you know, to overshare, but just to draw attention to the fact that everyone responds to stress in a different way. When everyone is escalated, we do experience this differently. And so being aware of how you react helps us be understanding of when others react. So let's talk about what workplace conflict does look like. And conflict isn't always just disagreement. Sometimes we want to think about things in terms of what kind of meaning gets added. So it's not always just that Amy and I, for example, disagree on something. Maybe the way that I say something to her makes her feel like I'm disrespectful, or that I question her intelligence, or that I have lost control of my own behavior. Maybe I'm making her feel embarrassed in a big group meeting. Maybe I make her feel unsafe in the way that I choose to engage in conflict. So when we think about conflict, it can look like power struggles or status threats. Can anybody think of an example of a power struggle in the workplace?
Confrontation with your supervisor.
That's the big one. Did you guys hear that? Confrontation with a supervisor? Yeah.
Or confrontation with an inspector that's trying to oversee your job of what you're doing.
confrontation with an inspector. This is Safety Fest, I would, yeah, that's right. Everything's fair game in here. This is a safe space. How about conflicting communication styles or norms? Any examples that you can think of there?
Generational,
Generational communication styles? What do you mean?
like Gen Z versus Gen X and how they communicate so differently in workspace.
Yep, so different generations definitely do have some different communication styles. Do I have any Gen Z folks in the room who would volunteer their preferred communication style in terms of conflict?
They're texting me right now.
They're gonna text me. Snapchat. I'm gonna get an angry eyes emoji. Yeah, I have a lot of Gen Z staff, and the way that the way that they communicate is certainly different than the way that I communicate. But that's the same for the staff that I have that come from a generation before me as well. They prefer a different communication style too, and so there definitely needs to be some adaptability along that spectrum from everybody. Yeah. What about participation imbalances or feeling shut out? This comes from two different spectrums. Yeah.
Maybe an introvert and an extrovert.
An introvert and an extrovert. Yep, that's two ends of the spectrum. I think we've all been in meetings where there is a dominant voice in the room. Yeah? Has anyone ever felt like they prefer to stay quiet maybe in a meeting, but someone calls you out and wants you to contribute? I'll walk around and I'll probably do that during this session. You guys will like put your eyes down a little bit, and then I'll come over and I'll stand a little bit close to you and I'll just, yeah. I'll probably do that too, yeah. Yeah, so this is really important, and if there are managers in the room, having some skills around this is important. Being able to confidently talk to someone and say, hey, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Let's hear from some other voices in the room today, or, let's do a round robin so everybody gets a chance to talk, or, hey, so-and-so, I know that you're really thoughtful about these things, and if you don't want to share it right now, that's okay, but can you send me your thoughts in an email later? Just making room for everyone, but also tempering that. Other types of conflict, confusion, ambiguity, and lack of information. Has anyone ever gotten an ask from a boss and you went, huh? Not having quite enough information to execute? What about from a colleague who makes an ask of you? Anybody have any examples there? This one's a little bit trickier, but it's actually a source of a whole lot of conflict. Lack of information or confusion about information, or uncertainty and fear to ask for more information is a source of a ton of conflict in a lot of cases. The last one that tends to be a lot of fun, identity-based, cultural, generational, or role-based friction. So we talked about generational a little bit, and we talked about role-based friction in terms of power struggles and status. But basic identity-based, cultural, or role-based friction can be a little bit more or a little bit less overt, a little bit subtle. One of the things that I do with my team is that I make sure that both the men and the women are taking notes in our meetings. Because a lot of times we would have gals who would just volunteer to take the notes. And I make sure that we rotate through taking the notes, because that's a task that can sometimes end up on one particular gender. So I make sure that we rotate through that. Other things that are role specific, I think can pop up in all sorts of different settings. Does anybody have any that you can think of? These ones are a little tougher, aren't they? Yeah.
It's like in families and stuff, typically the guy is expected to do like yard maintenance and stuff like that. And that's kind of the role that he gets, is all the physical stuff, the climbing the ladders, the painting, all that stuff, versus the general female role is the interior.
Yeah, did you guys hear that from the back? He's talking about, rather than the workplace, at home, there are sort of gender roles sometimes in who does which tasks at home. I know at my house, when the garbage can is full, I just shove it down a little bit further until my husband gets a chance to go do his job, which is to get that garbage out. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It can happen in the workplace too, though.
But it can.
Same kind of expectations.
Yep.
Versus male versus female still happens in the workplace too. Those same kind of duties.
Yep.
Who makes the coffee?
Who makes the coffee, who takes the notes, all of those kinds of things. Yep, you bet. So the main point here, the main takeaway that I want you guys to get is that escalation often begins when a person interprets behavior not just as inconvenient, but again as disrespectful, or something that makes them feel unsafe or uncomfortable, or that things are unfair or inappropriate, or that someone is trying to control them. It's not always connected to intent, but it's the way that it's received. So let's talk about science. When things happen in our brain, we get a stress response. So when we have a perceived threat, that activates that stress response. We get a flood of chemicals. From a neurobiology standpoint, when a perceived threat shifts our attention and our response capabilities, we have adrenaline that prepares our body for immediate action. Fight, flight, or freeze, that people talk about a lot. Flight is obviously run away. The gentleman I shared who had to go use the bathroom, that would be flight. You know, his body tells him, we gotta go. Fight. I think everybody can think of an individual that they've encountered, or maybe that you recognize in yourself, who might be the type of person who reacts with a strong pushback immediately. Yeah, did you say something?
Yeah, and for myself personally, when I'm in a very stressed situation where I'll have things I want to say, literally there's a miswire, I can't say anything. Literally words don't come out.
Yep. So what the gentleman in front shared was a lot of times he will feel like there's a misfire where he's got lots of things that he wants to say, but the words don't come out. So from the brain to the mouth, there's just a misfire. I think I actually, I feel the very, very same way sometimes when there's something where I feel threatened. I will often freeze, and I think sometimes part of that is just because I want to think. I want time to think through things. But part of the time is just because I can't. Yeah. So the next thing that happens is we've got cortisol that helps us stay vigilant. And this is, this is part of evolution. We used to need cortisol to protect us from real threats, right? Not from, is anybody named Deborah? Okay. To protect us from Deborah down the hall, who's just really aggressive and always wants to fight and nitpick and all of those things. Our attention narrows. We're not able to think about anything in a way that, gives somebody the benefit of the doubt, or that helps us think through, maybe they actually meant this, or maybe they actually meant that. Our body is just fired up, and it's like, no, not again, Deborah. It's not happening. And then your body is fully mobilized before you're able to have a reasonable, thoughtful interaction. So, like we talked through before, these are some of the different things that show up. That faster heartbeat, the blood pressure, shallow breath, sweaty palms. I actually had a picture of Eminem that I was going to put up here for those of you who are familiar with the song. But then I decided to be real professional-like and just share that verbally with you instead. Interrupting, defensiveness, really rigid thinking. So what does this look like in our actual brain? Does anyone know what your amygdala is? Yep. Right here in the back of our brain. It's an almond shape, about the size of an almond. Some people refer to it as your lizard brain. Have you heard that? So it's this early part of our brain that helps us detect threats. It helps our system to respond quickly when something feels dangerous, unfair, or destabilized. It's to help protect us. Our prefrontal cortex is this front part of our brain that helps us be rational. This is also the part of our brain that isn't really fully developed until we're about 25. So when you try to have a super rational conversation with your 14-year-old who knows everything, that doesn't always go great, does it? Sometimes. It helps us with things like planning, judgment, inhibition, perspective taking, language organization, and flexibility in problem solving. So which one of these do you think takes over when we are escalated?
The lizard brain.
Obviously, the lizard brain, that little almond in the back of our head. So our goal when we are escalated or when someone else is escalated and we're trying to settle something down is to get them to move from here over to here. And so when I was talking earlier about how we need to get folks from over here to over here before we try to reason with them, this is why. When someone's over here in this part of their brain, they're not able to do that rational thinking. They're not able to think through your suggestions, the great idea that you have to solve the problem. They're stuck over here in danger. Excuse me. When we're under acute stress, we're not able to be reflective. We don't have that capacity. People become less able to hold multiple interpretations at once. So what that means is basically, I can't walk in your shoes. I can't see things from your perspective. I don't know how to do that. So that's why just calm down is not an effective approach. So I wasn't totally mature. I lied. So what threat does to our interpretation? So when someone makes a neutral statement, let's go back to my example with Amy here. If I say to Amy, can we talk about what happened on that shift? Maybe she and I had an interaction that wasn't great. And it feels, generally not particularly intense. But maybe Amy and I have a history of interactions where I've kind of thrown her under the bus, or where she's felt really called out, or where I have made her look bad in front of our supervisor, or you get the point. What she may hear is, oh man, I'm about to be blamed again, or embarrassed, Crystal's gonna get me written up, why is she so rotten? Her likely response is gonna be more like a defense, a counterattack, shutting down, denying, or maybe being a little sarcastic. Would you be sarcastic, Amy? Probably. So our conflict responses aren't just a response to the meaning of what someone said. It's not just a response to, can we talk about what happened on that shift? Not just those specific words, but all of the context that comes from around that. All of the experiences that Amy has had with me. All of the times that I may have been rotten, or that she's perceived that I've been rotten. Maybe I haven't, but that's what the perception has been. I was probably rotten. So let's go through what we can do to de-escalate. Again, the de-escalation has to come before we can persuade. We need to move over from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex. We need to lower the intensity before we solve the content. We need to reduce the threat before we ask for accountability. We need to signal respect before asking for cooperation. We need to create the safety for the thinking to come back online. There's one thing that's missing here, and I want to point out what is not here. We don't have to agree. So just because we are de-escalating and we're helping a person doesn't mean that we are agreeing with them or giving them their way, right? If every time someone's escalated, we say, oh, no, okay, you're right, it's your way or the highway. That's not what we want to do, correct? Okay. So our working definition that I want you to base things off of here for de-escalation is the deliberate reduction of interpersonal threat so that more reflective and productive communication can become possible. Not so that we can agree or appease Amy, or make everybody happy, or just stop fighting, right? We need to move towards agreement, because part of this is getting what we want too. Yeah? Okay. How many folks in here consider yourselves to be a conflict avoider? Raise them high, loud and proud. There's usually about 25 to 50% of folks who will acknowledge that they are conflict avoiders. In my experience, it's closer to like 70-75% in reality. People might not consider themselves a conflict avoider, or they may not avoid all conflicts, but many people will at least avoid some types of conflict. And that's okay. We're learning tools that we can use for that. So here's the part where we're going to do some learning in terms of techniques that we can use. There are some specific steps that we're going to follow, and I've got these for everybody. I might not have printed enough for everybody, but they're available on the website too. So the first step is to notice. Notice your own activation. We did that at the beginning of the session. We're going to pause and regulate. My hands are sweaty. Mom's spaghetti. And we're going to get a feel for where we're at. Make sure that we're calm before we say anything. You can come up with different things that you might want to say for that. You can just say, hey, I'm going to take a breath real quick. And most people will give you that space. Then you're going to listen for the concern underneath an attack that someone is lodging at you. So, for example, if I had said something inflammatory to Amy, is it okay if I keep using you as an example? Okay. I promise I won't make you stand up here and do anything. If I've said something inflammatory to Amy, she wants to listen for the concern underneath my attack, not just the attack itself. Then she wants to name that concern in less threatening language. So I say something to Amy like, you never take me seriously, all you want to do is make me look bad. Which part of that is the real concern and which part of that is the attack?
Concern is flipping.
Yep. Which part is the attack? The blaming, where you always make me look bad. That's the attack because I'm attacking her, right? It's an attack on her character. She's always making me look bad. Okay. Check whether you understood correctly.
Impetuous reaction to something I heard in the conversation that can't wait.
Yep.
And just on the way in, same thing, she talked about buying some UV clothing for my grandson. And I said, oh yeah, and she was getting to her point. And I said, oh yeah, that reminds me. And she says, I'm not done. And so some of this is going to work really well. Others of it, she's going to be prepared because all I had to say is conflict resolution. She says, don't even think about it.
Yes. And I would argue that that does in fact connect very directly to respect because she feels, I would guess, when she gets interrupted, that that is not respecting the time that she wants to.
Well, she's not the only one I interrupt.
Touche. All right, I'm going to keep us moving forward. We're going to do one more activity before we run out of time here, but this is going to be a group activity. So I'm going to ask you guys to get into groups of preferably at least 4, but 4 to 5 if we can. And so we're going to do this a little bit differently here. Before you do that, hold on folks, just 1 second. Before you do that, I want to explain what this is going to look like. We need one person to play the escalated individual, and this is where you can get a little bit more feisty. Don't blow the whole thing up because we do want to, practice the skills again, but be a little bit feisty. And then we need one person to be the person who works to resolve the issue, who's going to be our responder. And then the others get to observe and look for escalation cues and missed opportunities, or if you feel so benevolent, drop a hint to your buddy if you have ideas to how they might be able to do that. And then if we do have time, let's rotate roles once in the group to do that. we want to be thinking about what reduced the threat, what raised it, and what might work better next time. And so I will put this scenario up on the screen. Again, one escalated individual, one person who resolves, and then other helpers. So here's your group scenario. Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. All right. So here's your scenario. We are at a safety or toolbox meeting on our job site. There's a new procedure that's being introduced by the foreman. Boss is the bad guy. There are several workers who already feel that the decisions are often made without enough input from the people doing the work. One of the participants becomes visibly agitated and says, "This is always how it goes. Decisions get made, and the people that are actually doing the work are the last to know." So, one quick caveat, the boss is not in this group, so you guys can speak freely. All right? You guys can speak freely, but you need to work towards resolution. The inflammatory statement has been made, but the person who it has been made about is not in the group. All right? Okay. Go ahead. All right. So this one was just a little bit different, and the main thing that was different was that one of the parties to the conflict was not in the room. So how did that change things?
We all agree.
Did everybody agree?
We know what the problem was.
That's right. It's a lot easier to blame somebody who's not around, isn't it? Yeah? Go ahead.
I mean, it's not directed at me. What is my interest in de-escalating the person at all, rather than just letting them reign for a bit?
Good. So there's less incentive to de-escalate when the other person's not around. What does that mean for conflict then? What does that mean for that conflict in particular?
It just keeps getting bigger.
But it's not a conflict between the people like there.
It's not a conflict between the people in the room, but it is a conflict that continues to exist. It's a conflict that may escalate because we're not necessarily in that collaborative frame of mind because we don't have to be, right? Because that person who we may be in conflict with, or who is the source of the frustration, or who is the person who instigated the frustration, is not there where we're having to do that relationship with that dialogue, all of those things. Yeah, Randy.
I think the challenge here is how do you go from it being a bitch session to being a problem-solving session?
Yep.
And you might not have skills in the room to get there.
Yep, so how do we go from having it be a session where we're all just sitting around and bitching to a session where we can move towards some actual resolution, not just because, one, it's tempting to just continue to do the griping when you've got the opportunity, but also because the other person isn't there to present the other side. Now, I came around to some of you and let you know that you were kind of a mole for the boss. Did anybody change the dynamic of your group based on that?
Yes.
Yes. What did that do?
It put a lot of pressure on listening to relating.
All right, hold on 1 sec, guys. Tell me a little bit about what that was like.
She pointed out that I felt like I wasn't able to participate in the venting because I wanted to protect, we called him Bob. And she realized that I was trying to portray positive things about Bob, like saying, well, maybe Bob's going through some things. Have you tried to talk to Bob? And I'm looking at her going, what are you doing?
So, and I use these terms, and they may not be the right words to use. I say a mole for the boss, but maybe we actually agree with the boss. Maybe you're a person in the room who thinks like, yeah, we have to change this process. And the reason that you guys haven't been part of this decision is that every time we've tried to make these decisions, everybody just drags their feet and they don't do it, and we need to get better because this continues to be a problem. You know, maybe there are legitimate reasons, but when you're in this group and you're the only voice, you can't speak up. Who else was the mole? What was that like?
Breathing like a rat.
We called him out on it right away because we figured he was a mole before you told us.
So this was a little bit different, and it's intentional. My goal was for us to be able to do several of these. As usual, I said too many words and didn't give you guys enough of a chance to say more words yourself, but I really wanted to get a chance to do this one too, just to point out that there are lots of different ways that conflict shows up, and the way that we practice reframing doesn't always necessarily happen in this really clean sort of me versus you fashion. It can happen in all sorts of different settings with all sorts of different dynamics. I want to ask, before we wrap up, and we do only have a few minutes, based on everything that we've talked about today, what questions do you have? Yeah?
A lot of this seems to kind of depend on all parties being intent on coming to a resolution. What would you suggest if you're in a situation with someone who's not interested in a resolution, who's just interested in escalating it further?
Burn it to the ground. No, of course we don't want to do that. What I will say is that when you get into a scenario where you feel like the other party isn't necessarily willing to be at that place, I think that that's something where you can go through a few of these steps, and you've got those with you now. You can go through some of these steps and do it a couple times. You know, test for understanding, test for willingness, and oftentimes you can just ask. You know, I think that sometimes we call that naming the frame. So you can say, I can tell that you're really escalated here. I can tell that this is frustrating for you. Is this something that you feel like you want to work towards resolution today, or do you want some time? Do you think I could come back and check with you on Tuesday to see if you're ready to talk about it? If you feel like it's something that can't wait, that's a little harder. And you may want to try and continue the conversation. But if you feel like it's something that can wait, you might want to give them the grace to try and extend the conversation, or ask them, do you think you might be willing to come back to me when you're ready to talk about this a little bit more? Because I really do want to have this conversation with you. So you're extending the invitation to them.
I think you need to say, instead of saying, come back to me when you're ready, because they'll never come, there's a possibility they would never come back. So you need to give them like,
Yep.
I understand you're not ready to talk about this today. You need more time to maybe process what I've said. Let's meet again tomorrow or in 2 hours or whatever.
If you feel like they won't come back, yeah, absolutely. You can say something like, I'm going to check in with you on Friday to see where you're at with this, or I'm going to come back here at the end of the day, you know, when there's 30 minutes left in the day so that we can talk about this, to set an expectation with them that the conversation isn't over, but you do want to give them some space. Other questions? We solved it all, didn't we?
World
Yeah.
peace next.
World peace next. That's right. Okay. Well, I'm going to put my contact information up here. Oop, maybe. I am not. You got nothing. There we go. So I'm Crystal Armstrong. I've got my personal email up here. I've got my state of Montana email up here. And I've got my number up here. If you do have questions, feel free to reach out anytime. I get back to folks on a pretty regular-ish basis, so if you don't hear back right away, I promise I do eventually get back to people, but give me 2 or 3 days grace period, just because my schedule is pretty crazy right now, but I'm happy to talk about any of these things. I love to nerd out about all of this. I thank you so much for your attention today. I hope this was valuable, and I hope that the rest of your time at Safety Fest is good.